fellow travelers, and welcome to the Versus Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because Jay Holtham boards the mothership. You know him as the writer of Bishop War College from Marvel Comics. Come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Holtham. Thanks so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's totally my honor as well, sir. So I always start out with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who your earliest influences?
What inspired my love for comics was it was a lot of things. They were sort of always part of my life. My older brother is the person who brought them into my world. Most specifically, he was a big comic book person. He's an artist. He loved to draw. And so I got all of his discarded comics. So from the time I was like 6 or 7, I was reading comics. I didn't get really serious about it until I was about 10. And that's when I really started reading New Mutants and X-Men comics in particular. And so, yeah, I mean, and that was, obviously during the Claremont run. And so Claremont and Byrne, John Byrne, are probably, in terms of comics, the biggest influences on the way I look at them, the way I read, and the things that I want to read for.
So obviously there's a lot of comic books out there. What was it about New Mutants and the X-Men that grabbed your attention?
It was, I mean, primarily, I've said this in a couple of interviews, and it's true, like the New Mutants really kind of saved my life. When I was 10, I moved from Brooklyn, where I'd been living at the time with my mother and my older brother and some other siblings. I moved with my brother into New Jersey with my dad, out of sort of the heart of Brooklyn, Bushwick in the 80s, into a very, very white New Jersey suburb. And so reading comic books about outsiders, about people who were misfits, who didn't fit into society, helped me feel a lot less alone. And so that's really, particularly, the New Mutants, I was 10, 11, 12. The New Mutants were teenagers. It was stories that made sense to me, characters that made sense and sort of reflected emotionally my life and world. And so I was just all the way in on those.
You know what I really like about that story is that it really tells you that comic books just aren't throwaway reading material. They do have weight to them. They do have influence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never been someone, and I've been, with my family, I fought this fight for a very long time. I've never been someone who thought of them as just throwaway entertainment or kid stuff, even though, they are generally meant for kids. But that doesn't mean there isn't weight. There's an emotional truth that there aren't bigger thoughts and emotional realities that they help you confront. Like that's what they exist for. That's what they've always existed for. I was just talking to someone about Superman and the creation of Superman, and learning that what was it? Jerry Siegel's father was shot in a robbery, and then obviously he created a superhero who couldn't be shot. It's the heart of creation. That's what we do, and comic books, I think, are just a great medium for it.
And I will definitely be a supporter of the idea that all art does have that meaning and purpose. If it's going to have value to do at all, it has to have a value of creating a purpose for the readers. And I think that's fantastic. Absolutely. So when you're the writer of Bishop War College, or because obviously it's completely the miniseries.
Yep.
When you go into your writing, or how do you think about that as far as your approach? Like, I want to say something of value. What do I want to say? Or do you focus on a story and what comes out of it comes out of it?
No, I very much start from the place of, okay, I'm creating this story. What do I want to say about it? That's how I approach all of my writing. I tend to be that kind of writer, and I tend towards the idea that form sort of follows function and structure follows intent. I look at story as you're building up to a climatic choice, and that climatic choice tells you the theme of the thing. So when I went to approach Bishop War College, I was really interested in digging into Bishop as, in some ways, as a trauma victim. As someone who has lived through so much pain and so much suffering that it's, turned him into this very stoic, emotional sort of robot, not robot, but like very stoic, very dark, very, very grim kind of person, which is reasonable given all of the things he's experienced. And I really wanted to say, what does a person like that do when confronted with the possibility that life could have been some other way for them? And how do you confront that? Because he's in this place and he's lived through all these things, and I look at him as someone who thinks life is terrible and vicious and you can't trust people, and I really like the idea of what happens when you are confronted with that's not necessarily true of life.
I think when you think about Bishop and how he's often been handled in comic books, you think of the major story, which is, once again, he was in a future time where mutants are being killed by Thanos, something like that. He goes back in time to kill the one he feels responsible. He's a soldier. Do you think enough tension is given to him beyond that aspect of his character?
I mean, I always love to see more tension and more complications, particularly with Black characters, just because being Black in any sort of world is a nest of conflicting identities and ideas about yourself and reactions. And wanting to see Bishop, even though, he's from a future that seems to exist in a slightly more colorblind, more awfully colorblind, but colorblind space, just to understand what it means for him to confront the present, confront this past. That the thing that I really, really did latch onto here is confronting this past that he had imagined as completely different. And that was something I really wanted to explore and confront, in that sense of, he's got this core belief about the world, and I just wanted to poke at it and challenge it and see how he responded to that. And so it's that I feel like there's more to be like mined in that character that I think is interesting, and I would love to do more with him.
Now, when obviously, like as we mentioned, you're the writer of Bishop War College. Did you approach them with your Marvel with your console? Did Marvel approach you and say, "Would you like to work on a Bishop miniseries?"
Marvel approached me, Sarah Brunstad, who I'd worked with briefly on a short Captain America Sam Wilson story for Marvel Voices Legacy in 2022, approached me and said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing a Bishop book. Are you interested?" And I said, "Of course." And she laid out that, so this is what he's doing now, teaching these younger mutants, and what do you want to do with that? And one of the things that sort of leapt out in like a little bit of research and in conversation with Sarah was this idea that he had imagined the X-Men as Black. And I was like, well, that's an interesting place to take him, to have him see that. And what does that do to him? And of course, for me, it's okay, how do you build that world where that is true, and what would make that world different than the world that we're in? And so that was where the story took me.
So when they discussed with you the concept and you shared with them what your idea of it was there any parameters, editorial mandates, anything they said either you can touch it or keep off these rails?
Nope. They were very, very open to whatever I wanted to do and however I wanted to take the story. And even the sort of side stories, we talked about one of the things that happens in this is there's kind of a split in the story, because Bishop and Tempest go into this alternate universe while his students are strapped underneath Krakoa with the Fenris twins. And it was great because they were like, here are a bunch of young mutants who have been introduced in the last couple of years that haven't had a lot of showcases for them. Which ones do you want to play with? And that was great, getting to play with Vita's characters, with characters that were introduced by Teeny, by all these people, and be like, oh, this is okay, these are fun characters to like bounce off of each other while Bishop is on this sort of philosophical journey into this other timeline.
Now, obviously, one other thing about the X-Men is that once again, there are usually a lot of titles, a very complex continuity. Is it hard to find a spot to pick to tell your story, or were you already following the titles?
I was following the titles a bit, and I was, generally aware of the Krakoa era. There are a few things that I had to like get up to speed on about sort of the background of the individual characters and their personalities. But this was, always sort of treated as a little bit of an offshoot, but in continuity with everything else. So that was a lot of working with the editor, both Sarah and Mark Basso. Working with him, working with both of them was about like, okay, what do other characters know? What do other X-Men know? What has gone on? Where do these things fit in? Particularly in dealing with sort of the Orcus of it all, and their nefarious plans.
When you're choosing these characters, once again, you chose characters that are relatively newer. Did you choose them based on what you thought their chemistry would be like together? Was there something you wanted to say with each character? How did you choose the ones that you ended up with?
I choose them based off what I thought the chemistry would be together. And really wanting to pull people who weren't necessarily super familiar with each other. And so that was really and like just sort of interesting power sets, and like these are interesting characters to show some other flavors of. I was really interested in working with Cam and with Aura just because it's an interesting couple that hadn't gotten a lot of time. And I was like, let's play with them.
I think that's the thing true that is about the X-Men. There's such a large number of them that it's so easy to forget certain characters, or they get like a little taste of this character, then you just don't see him ever again.
Exactly. Then they're like drawn in the background of group scenes for 5 years. It's especially now with like there being so many, and with the resurrection protocols and all. So it just sort of like everyone keeps coming, and even being able to bring back characters from 15 years ago that no one has seen. Like it's wild.
And when you're dealing with a cast of the size of Bishop Warcock, once again, it's Bishop Warcock, so obviously Bishop's your primary protagonist, but there's a lot of other characters as well. Is it difficult to make sure you're giving them proper time and development? Is it hard not to lose a thread where you get stuck? You get interested in one storyline and you forget, how to tie back in the other one.
It was hard. It was definitely a balancing act, and harder than, honestly, in some ways, harder than I expected it to be. Just because there's also so little real estate, by basically splitting the stories into two, that gave us sort of 10, 11 pages per issue for each story. Which is one thing that I liked about it, was that it kind of limited the amount of plot that I had to deal with, and sort of plot mechanics. And I think, I hope people enjoyed it. It did allow the characters to breathe a little bit more. It sort of gave them one point of conflict per episode or issue between them. But then that just allowed like the emotional stuff to happen.
I mean, obviously, the stories, as you mentioned, they diverge in two directions. Bishop, with the time traveling, and then you have the classmates as well doing their own story. How do you make them, obviously they're their own storyline, divergent, but they need to feel like they exist within the same overall story. So how did you make sure that had that feeling that they do belong together, even though they diverge?
I mean, I wanted to keep them within the same sort of philosophical question of, when you're trained for battle, what happens when the battle is over? And vice versa, what happens what turns a person into a person of battle? Like that's what Bishop is doing. Bishop is trying to train these kids to fight a war. And in some ways, he has to be reminded that you fight a war for a point, not just to fight a war. And for the kids, they have to be reminded that there is a war to be fought, and that they're up to the task. And so that was the sort of interplay. Like I wanted to sort of build to, in the final issue, the moment where these two people come back together and they've both learned something about themselves and each other in it,
And I mean, and obviously this gives you a lot of chance to explore Bishop as a character. And I like how in the very first page you have Bishop described as being intense, ferocious, ruthless. So in thinking about that, how do you approach Bishop? Because once again, those three traits don't usually say a character that a reader would automatically attach to, because once again, those are very standoffish traits, very off-putting on some level. I'm not saying your writing was, obviously the character.
That's the character, and like that's the thing. That is exactly the thing that I want to play with. That's exactly the thing that I really enjoyed with doing this. That's who he is. I like I said, I love dichotomies. I love interpersonal conflict. For me, the part that in that first issue that I think was the key and was the one of the moments that I liked the most is when he's having this fight with Danny, and Danny calls him a bully. And I really meant it really genuinely for Bishop to be like, "You think I'm a bully?" And it's like it hadn't occurred to him that that's how people saw him, because he's just focused on, I have a task at hand. I have to fight a war. And to realize that, oh, wait, yelling at people isn't necessarily the best way to prepare them to fight a war. And to at least start that journey for him to be like, well, is that what's motivating me?
I think what's interesting, like I said, because he is a soldier, it kind of brings the idea that as a soldier, is that something that brings inherently empathy as part of its goal? I don't know if a soldier is inherently empathetic.
No.
Obviously, your goal is to kill an enemy.
Yeah. I mean, and that is exactly it. But the reason he fights this war is to protect something beautiful. The reason he's doing this war training with these younger mutants is to teach them to protect Krakoa, to protect mutant life, to protect their very hard-won victories and the world that they've built. And I think part of the sort of narrow-mindedness of the soldier, and again, part of what I wanted to confront with him, is that sometimes in that sense, you lose sense of the thing you're protecting, as opposed to being prepared for the fight.
And once again, looking at those traits that we discussed of intensity, for ruthlessness, and of that nature, in your opinion, when you think about Bishop, are those traits that are inherent to him, or those traits that he feels a need to become in order to survive?
That's the question. Like, that's the exact question. I think at the beginning of the series, Bishop thinks these are traits that are inherent to me. I am an intense, ruthless, mission-focused person because that's who I am, and that's the way the world has made me. And there is no other way really to be in this world. Anyone else who is different is naive. Like, I think that's where he started from. And then being confronted with, nerd Bishop, gentle, soft teacher Bishop, it was like, oh, maybe I could have been different, or I could be different, or maybe ultimately there is something softer inside of me that I've lost touch with, that I need to reconnect with.
There's an aspect of to reference another character, Batman, where they had the idea that Batman, the Robins, there's certain writers who would have them refer to them as soldiers, a good soldier, that kind of thing. I think Frank Miller did that as well. And then other writers have used more of the idea of, these are my sons, these are not the soldiers. So for Bishop, are they students or are they soldiers?
I mean, that's the question. Like, that's the journey. I think at the beginning of this, they're soldiers. He's drilling soldiers. And by the end of it, he realizes they're students and I have to teach them something. Like, I am definitely in the with Batman, like, it's again, I was talking about it with someone yesterday. Like, I prefer the soldier Batman, but as opposed to Batman as trauma victim, Batman as dark, tortured soul. I prefer him as someone who has made a decision about the way the world is and the way he interacts with it, and he follows that. And I think the journey for him always, I think that's what Dick was trying to do the entire time he was with him, was like, no, you're a father. We're your family. Treating us like soldiers is actually bad. I
agree completely. And I think another interesting aspect is that the character of Danny Moonstar, who's a very good counterpoint to Bishop within the War College. Obviously, she's kind of like Bishop's conscience. At least that's kind of what it feels like. If she's Bishop's conscience, what is Bishop then for her?
I mean, Bishop for her is the counterpoint. Bishop for her, because the thing I wanted to make sure was clear was that Bishop isn't wrong. Mutants are still under threat. Krakoa is still this delicate, beautiful thing that has to be defended. It's just, where do you put your focus on that? I don't think I think he's wrong to think of, Dani as naive in any way, but I think Dani realizes she's wrong in that, and that's sort of the journey with the kids. She's wrong in that Bishop is going about this the worst possible way. Ultimately, the kids step up, despite how much he drilled them, despite how much he sort of implied and even stated that they weren't up to the task and that they weren't working hard enough. They did work hard enough. They did learn, and they were able, without him and without anyone else, to defend Krakoa and to risk their lives to do so.
Now, I think like a cool aspect is that you have him travel to, I believe it's Earth 63.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there a particular reason you chose it number 63, or
it's the birth of the X-Men?
Oh, damn it. I could have totally missed one that was totally obvious. Sorry about that.
Yep. Very specifically. And, obviously 1963 is a formative, important year in the world and all of those. But for me, it was like, that's the year they were born. And the X-Men, have always been a bit of a metaphor, allegory for race relations. Not always. Pretty much in the Claremont years, post sort of God loves, man kills. That's when really they turned into the skid of X-Men as race allegory, which I've always both loved, obviously, as a kid and connected to, but I've also been frustrated by, because there are so few Black X-Men. And particularly as it could hit a breaking point for me watching X-Men First Class and looking at Jennifer Lawrence and Nicholas Hoult, two very, very attractive, very white people, both very good actors. This is nothing against them, but watching them have a scene talking about how they don't fit in and the world doesn't want them. And I'm like, we might have lost the thread here a little bit on this, you guys. So those were the things that were in my mind, both in the choice of the number of the Earth and both in the creation of that world.
And when you're thinking about the Earth 63, and you have once again Bishop visits this world, and all the X-Men are Black, is there a comforting aspect to, as you mentioned, the other Bishop of this world, or is it frustrating to know that even this other Earth, their X-Men and mutants are still fighting the same battles over and over again? That there's, I guess, a universal aspect to, no matter what world, those are be viewed as different, are going to be fighting these battles. How does Bishop approach that?
I wanted to approach it. It was there's a fine line there, because I wanted to approach it as a better version of our world. That it is a world that is much more at peace, where mutants are much, much, much better integrated into society, and much more at ease, but that there are still, there are still dangers, there are still threats. And it is, should be a little bit of a sad but right moment at the end when, Nerd Bishop is training to fight. That Nerd Bishop has learned, I can't just trust that the world will be okay. We do have to defend this. And so it's bittersweet in my mind, because, it's a very different kind of world. It is a world where the guard is much, much further down, where the threats are feel more distant. Mutants don't need to hide in any way, but there are still people who don't like them, and that's a balance, as opposed to the 616 reality, where mutants are not just constantly they are constantly at war. It's not even just threats, it's war.
So, and another great aspect of the series, I don't know why this part I really enjoyed it, but I like that fact that at the end the students all get grades. Really kind of cool.
It's a class, like it's a class, and I feel like that's also part of Bishop's journey, and just part of Bishop's nature. Bishop is the kind of person who's like, oh no, I'm teaching a class, therefore they get grades and they get recommendations about what happens next.
Now, when you're thinking about the grades for the students, did you come up with them early in your construction of the series and go, this is where I'm going to take them, or did you write the story and go, I wonder how they did at the end?
It was that one. It was definitely that. As I was thinking about those last data pages, I wanted to look back and be like, okay, who has actually learned? Who's surprised Bishop? Who's surprised me? And who, going back to what we were talking about, who do I think we got to explore aspects of that maybe weren't fully explored in other books? And one of those characters to me was Aura. Was really digging into Aura being discovering, not necessarily discovering, but really getting to show those leadership skills and to show that that empathetic leader that she could be in the future.
Now, after you finished writing it, did a character surprise you about where they took you?
That is a good question. And yes and no. I mean, Aura surprised me a little bit in exactly what we were talking about, but I'm not surprised because when I just sit down, I sort of let them go and then they go where they're going to go. Like the characters go where they're going to go. The overall story, I kind of know like the beats or the big moments. Like I knew it was going to be a story of these 5 kids who are supposed to be on, it's the classic story of we're on a training mission that turns into a real mission and now we have to figure out what to do. And particularly when the Blightswill is introduced and they're stripped of their powers, or their powers were working against them, then it was like, oh, what is this? I think I had in some ways the most latitude with Amass, because in their previous appearances we hadn't even seen their power set and how it worked. And so I feel like I got to sort of spread my wings a little bit more with them, maybe with them than the others.
Now, obviously, Bishop War College was a great miniseries. Are there whispers of it continuing into a new series? Is there, like, would we know where these characters are going to go from here?
I think everyone will be interested and surprised and excited to see what happens next with Bishop and these characters. I think we should all just be buckled up and prepared for the Hellfire Gala and what comes after.
Okay, so I don't know if you quite stated it's something that if there was going to be a continuation of Bishop War College, is that something you'd be writing?
At this point, no. But I hope I get a chance to return to these characters and have some more fun with them down the road.
Do you think you'll have a chance to explore Earth 63 further somewhere down the road?
I would love to. So let's put it into the world.
So what's next for you?
What's next? I've got a book of my own that I'm working on that I'll be able to announce, I think, in another couple of months that I'm really excited about. So my first original comic book. And then once this strike is over, back to work on The Handmaid's Tale for season 6.
Very cool. How's that going for, as the writer's strike?
I mean, for the writers, like, it's been difficult and tough in a lot of ways, but it's great to feel the support from the other unions, to feel the support from workers all over the country. Has been great, and our solidarity has been great. I just would really love for the producers to get off their asses and actually come to talk to us, because we all want to be back at work. We would all rather be working, but we need to make sure that, like, our jobs are protected, our future is protected, and I still don't understand why they don't want that.
Obviously, from the listener standpoint, is there anything that listeners can do to support the writer's strike? Because I would hope that all listeners, especially fans of comics and everyone else, knows the importance of writers in the industry. TV, movies, comics, it's all very important. Can they do anything to help support or help push this along so we can enjoy, again, the shows that we like?
I mean, the biggest things you can do to support, if you're in a city where there's picketing, come join the picket. We'll always be happy to have people with us on the picket. Share things on social media, because a big part of this is keeping the visibility up so that they don't forget that they're here. We're here and we're fighting. If you are in a financial position, donating to any of the various strike funds to help people who are struggling at this point. And I honestly just keep consuming the media, can keep reading the stories, keep talking about the stories, and keep reminding them that we are important to you and that the writers are important. That's at this point, that's the best that we can do.
Is there a danger with something like this going on too long that people tend to forget things over time when the stories, over when time continues? Sort of like I always find like I was gonna say like almost like the war in Ukraine, where because it's been going on for so long that people are like, oh right, that's still a thing.
Yep. There definitely is that danger, and that's why I'm saying it's just like talking it up, talking to people, coming out to join the picket so that there's visibility. All of those things help because the news cycle, in the last 2 weeks we've gone from orcas to submarines, Trump's indictment. It's all gonna keep churning forward. Everyone's talking about the Flash, all of that. But through it, we're still out on the line and we're still out there every day.
Well, like I said, our listeners, if you can support us any way that you can, that'd be fantastic. When you're ready to talk about hopefully season 6 of Handmaid's Tale or anything or your new title, come back on the show and talk with me. I would really enjoy it. It's been a pleasure.
To be back.
Thank you. Mr. Holtham. It's been an absolute honor.
Absolute pleasure here. Thanks so much for having me.